Welcome back to the animated past. Do me a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a video. Now, let's talk about the strangest, most world-changing disaster you were never quite taught properly. The Black Death. Here's the thing. Yes, it was the deadliest pandemic in human history. In the space of just a few short years in the middle of the 1300s, it killed tens of millions of people. By some estimates, as much as half of everyone alive in Europe. That part you've probably heard. But here's the part nobody tells you. The world that crawled out the other side came out almost unrecognizable. Better pay for ordinary people, weaker kings and lords, the very first quarantines, even, some say, the first seeds of the modern world. A tiny flea bite would end up toppling an entire way of life that had stood for 1,000 years. So how did it happen? Where did it come from? How did it spread so terrifyingly fast? And how did the worst catastrophe in history end up reshaping the world for the better? Let's rewind. To find the beginning of the story, we have to travel thousands of miles east, out to the vast, wind-swept grasslands of Central Asia. Out there, living quietly among the wild rodents of the steppe, was a tiny, ancient enemy. A bacterium we now call Yersinia pestis. And honestly, for centuries, it mostly minded its own business, passed from animal to animal by fleas, barely touching the wider world. So what changed? In a word, connection. The 1300s were a golden age of trade. The Mongol Empire, the largest land empire the world had ever seen, had linked China all the way to the edge of Europe with a sprawling network of trade routes we now call the Silk Road. And along those roads traveled everything you can imagine: silk and spices, gold and gossip, brilliant new ideas. And, tucked away in the grain sacks and saddlebags of the merchant caravans, fleas and rats. And here's the cruel irony at the heart of this whole story. The very thing that had made the medieval world rich and connected, trade, was about to become the thing that nearly destroyed it. Quietly, one trading post at a time, the plague began to move west. By the year 1347, it reached a busy trading city on the shores of the Black Sea, a port called Kaffa. And this is where the story takes a turn so dramatic it almost sounds made up. A Mongol army happened to be laying siege to the city. But as the plague began tearing through their own camp, the attackers, as the story goes, loaded the bodies of their dead onto catapults and flung them over the city walls. It may well be one of the earliest acts of biological warfare ever recorded. Whether those bodies really spread the disease or the rats simply did it on their own, the result was the same. The plague was now inside the city walls. So the terrified merchants of Kaffa did the only sensible thing. They ran. They piled onto their ships and sailed for home across the Mediterranean, having no idea they were carrying death in the cargo hold. And in October of 1347, a handful of those ships drifted into the harbor of Messina in Sicily. The sailors on board were dying, or already dead, covered in strange, dark swellings. The horrified locals took one look and ordered the ships back out to sea, but it was already far, far too late. Now here's what not a single person at the time could have known. The killer wasn't a curse from the heavens, and it wasn't poisoned air. It was that microscopic bacterium riding along inside fleas. Fleas that rode in turn on the black rats that infested every single ship, every granary, and every home in Europe. One flea bite, that's all it took. From Sicily, the plague jumped to the mainland, and it began to race across the continent like a wildfire with no one to put it out. And it really was a nightmare unlike anything the world had seen before. The most common form announced itself with grotesque swellings called buboes, hard, painful lumps that bloomed in the armpits, the neck, and the groin, sometimes growing as big as an apple. As the flesh beneath them died, they darkened, and it's that blackening that would eventually give the whole pandemic its haunting name. After that came the fever, and for most people who caught it, death followed within just a few days. And believe it or not, that was the slow version. There was another form, the pneumonic plague, which got into the lungs and spread straight through the air on a single cough or breath. And that one killed almost everyone it touched, sometimes within a day. The sheer speed of it was the most frightening part of all. You could feel perfectly fine at breakfast and be gone by nightfall. Bodies piled up faster than anyone could possibly bury them. Cities dug enormous pits outside their walls and filled them with the dead, layer upon layer. One survivor in the Italian city of Siena described stacking the bodies just as one makes lasagna, with layers of corpses and earth in between. It is, frankly, one of the most haunting things ever written. Across Europe, the same unimaginable scene played out again and again, and people genuinely began to wonder if this was the end of the world. Now put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You're facing an enemy you cannot see, cannot understand, and cannot fight. What do? Well, a lot of people decided this had to be the wrath of God, a punishment for humanity's sins. And so, all across Europe, bands of men called the flagellants began marching from town to town, whipping their own backs bloody in the public squares, begging the heavens for mercy. It didn't work, but you can understand the desperation. Others, tragically, went looking for someone to blame. And in one of the darkest chapters of an already dark time, frightened communities turned on their Jewish neighbors and spread a vicious lie that they had somehow poisoned the wells. It was completely false, but fear spread it faster than the plague itself, and thousands of innocent people were murdered, even as the Pope himself stepped in to declare their innocence. It's an ugly reminder of how fear can turn people against each other. As for the doctors, they were sadly helpless. They knew nothing of bacteria or fleas, so they blamed bad air and reached for bloodletting, strange potions, and sweet-smelling herbs, none of which did a thing. But out of all that trial and error came one idea that actually worked. In the great trading ports, officials started forcing newly arrived ships to sit at anchor, kept apart from everyone, for 40 days before anyone could step ashore. And in Italian, 40 days is 40 giorni, which is exactly where we get our word today, quarantine. By the time the worst of it finally burned out, around 1351, the world had been turned completely upside down. In just 4 years, the Black Death had killed perhaps 25 to 50 million people in Europe alone, somewhere between a third and a half of everyone on the continent. Across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe combined, the dead may have numbered as many as 200 million. No war, no famine, nothing before or since has ever taken so many lives so fast. And yet, here's the twist that makes this story so fascinating. The world that emerged from all that loss was, in some surprising ways, a better one for the people who survived. Think about it. With so many workers gone, the survivors suddenly became precious. For the first time in living memory, an ordinary laborer could look his lord in the eye, ask for better pay, and simply walk away if he didn't get it. The rigid old system of feudalism, which had chained peasants to their masters for centuries, started to crack. Wages went up. Whole new freedoms opened up where there had been none. And the church, which had prayed and yet been powerless to stop the dying, lost a little of its iron grip on people's minds. In the questioning that followed, some historians spot the very first sparks of the Renaissance and of the modern world we live in today. The plague never fully vanished, mind you. It came back in waves for centuries, including the famous Great Plague of London, more than 300 years later. But it never again hit with quite that same world-ending force. So yes, the Black Death was the closest humanity has ever come to the brink. But it also reshaped our medicine, our economy, our faith, and our very sense of how precious and how fragile life really is. And in a strange and beautiful way, the freer, more modern world we enjoy today was born out of one of its darkest hours. If you enjoyed this story, do me a small favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the Animated Past so you never miss what we bring to life next. We've got more history coming to life very soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.